Hi, in this video, we will learn about the International Labour Organization's legal framework to control the chemical hazard at workplace. This topic is a part of epidemiology and toxicology. So, the ILO implements the convention and recommendation to govern the exposure of worker to the chemical and substance. Different countries may adopt this convention to develop their legislation to govern the health and safety standards. So basically, there are two conventions. First is the ILO Chemical Convention C170 and its recommendation R177. And the next is the ILO Asbestos Convention C162 and recommendation R172. So now we will see in detail about the ILO Chemical Convention C170 and its recommendation R177. So basically the ILO Chemical Convention lays down guidelines for the classification of chemical, then labeling of chemical, and the control of exposure to the hazardous chemical at workplace. So the classification and labeling has now been under the harmonization process under the United Nations Global Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals. It aims to standardize the law with the principle of one chemical, one label worldwide. So regarding the labeling, the recommendation R177 details its requirement that are the chemical labeling should include trade name, identity of chemical, name, address, contact of supplier, hazardous symbol, special risk associated with the use, batch number, hazard classification, reference to the existing data sheet. So now we will discuss about the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. So the main purpose or main benefits of the harmonized system is that it would ease the export and import of chemicals by common classification and labeling of chemical. This will eliminate the requirement to reclassify them as per the changing legislations of the different regions or the countries. The next benefit is that the data will be available for most of the chemical and it will reduce the number of tests conducted on the animals. It also acknowledges that there may be reliable epidemiology data from human exposure which could be used. Synergistic effect, that is the result of two or more chemical resulting in the greater effect, should also be taken into the consideration. So there are three steps of assessment of the intrinsic hazards of the chemical under the globally harmonized system. So the step one is the identification of the relevant data regarding the hazard of substance or mixture. Since the data will be available for most of the chemical under GHS, so any new chemical or any chemical, not only the new one, but any chemical needs to be identified for the existing data to know its hazard or know its characteristics. Second step is the review of the data to determine the hazard, and the third is to decision as to whether the substance will be classified hazardous or not. So now the how the ILO convention C17 aims to reduce the work related injuries. So basically the control of exposure to the hazard at the workplace is for the workers, then general public, and to protect the environment. So it is the main objective of the ILO Chemical Convention C170. So now, what are the steps to control the exposure? So the first is by evaluating the chemical to know its hazard. The chemical must be evaluated to find what hazards are associated with it. The second is the ILO Chemical Convention lays down the guidelines which will enable employers to obtain the information of the chemical from the supplier and the manufacturer. So the supplier and manufacturer under this convention needs to provide with the safety data sheet and all the details of the hazards associated with the chemical. The third is by providing the worker with the information about the chemical hazard and the protection method. And it also stresses for the safe use of the chemical, which includes production, storage, handling, transport, disposal, treatment of waste, chemical release of chemical release of chemical at workplace, maintenance, repair or cleaning of chemical containers. So what is the hazardous chemical? So Article 6 defines chemical under ILO C170 as a hazardous chemical. Now, for the transport purpose, the United Nations recommendations on transport of the dangerous goods should be taken into account. Then the classification should be based upon the characteristics of the chemical. R177 expand this as the first characteristic of the chemical is based upon the toxicity. It can be acute or chronic. The next is the chemical or physical characteristic like flammability, oxidizing potential, then corrosive or irritant properties, then allergenic or sensitizing effect, then carcinogenic effect, that is cancer causing effects, then teratogenic effect, that is birth defect or mutagenic effect that can cause mutation in the DNAs. And the last is the effect on reproductive system. So now our next topic is the rights and responsibilities that has been identified in this ILO Convention C170. So the rights and responsibilities are assigned for the manufacturer or supplier, then the workers and general public. Now we will discuss the rights and responsibility individually of each. So first we are going to discuss about the manufacturer or supplier. So the manufacturer or supplier needs to classify the new chemicals. Then the manufacturer or supplier has a responsibility to label the chemical even if it is decanted to the other containers. And then the third, the manufacturer or supplier should supply the safety data sheet. So the recommendation R177 lists the contents of the safety data sheet. So the safety data sheet should contain the trade name of the chemical, the composition details, then the hazard identification, then first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage. Also, the exposure and the controls exposure controls, then personal protection methods of monitoring the workplace exposure, toxicological information, then stability and reactivity, and transportation information. Now we will discuss about the roles and responsibilities of the employers. So the employer must ensure that the chemical they are using in the workplace are properly labeled, and the employer should obtain the safety data sheet and make it available to the workers. The employer should make assessment of the exposure of the workers to the chemicals, and the employer should implement the operational control to reduce the risk. Now, the rights and responsibilities of the worker. So the worker should follow the employer's procedure. The worker should ensure their own safety. Then the worker should communicate about hazard to supervisor, which cannot be rectified by them. And the worker should stop the work and remove themselves from any danger which they feel. So now we will see the next chemical convention, that is ILO Asbestos Convention C162 and its recommendation R172. So basically asbestos is an fibrous mineral silicate of rock forming mineral. So the asbestos are classified as serpentine group, that is chrysotile, white asbestos, and amphibole group, which includes brown asbestos and blue asbestos. Or the asbestos may be a combination of the both serpentine group and amphibole group. So now what are the objectives of laying down the convention C162? So the first was objective is to reduce the risk of exposure of the worker, then to establish the national law, and to establish the competent authority to regulate the law. So basically there are three objectives. It aims to reduce the risk of exposure by establishing the law, and to establish the competent authority to regulate the law. So now what are the work activities covered by this ILO Convention C162? So the first is the mining and milling of the mineral containing asbestos. Next is the manufacturing of material containing asbestos. Then it is the use of products containing asbestos, stripping or repair of products containing asbestos, demolition, repair of plant structure containing asbestos, transportation, storage of material containing asbestos. So all these activities are covered under this convention. So now the next topic is how the prevention can be how the prevention can be achieved from the exposure to the asbestos. So the first is by the replacement of the asbestos product with less harmful non-asbestos product. Then is to establish the exposure limit, and where it is not in control, PPE or RPE should be provided. Then prohibiting the use in some process, specifically procidolite, that is the blue asbestos. Then the demolition work to be carried out by the competent and approved contractor. R172 requires to prior notify the competent authority. So in this way, the C172, C162 prevents C172 aims to achieve the prevention by employing all these methods.